Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Amber Strong.
And I'm John Jessup. Well, with just 5 days into the midterm elections, President Trump is making his way across the country to campaign for Republican candidates. Yeah,
beginning yesterday, the president started to push to go to 11 rallies before next Tuesday. He's visiting Missouri, West Virginia, Indiana, Montana, Georgia, Tennessee, and Ohio. Then he'll visit a couple states twice, including Florida, which is where the president was last night.
That's right, Amber. It also happens to be where our chief political analyst, David Brody, and Jenna Browder were last night. He joins us now to tell us about that. David?
Well, yesterday was kind of interesting.
A little bit?
Yeah, there's a plane called Air Force One, and we were on it, and I just wanted the free food, and I got it. Well, I don't know how free it was, but anyhow, John, Amber, obviously Jenna Browder, our colleague, and I were invited on Air Force One by the president. We thought the trip would happen sometime before the midterm elections next week, but actually we got the call at the last moment on Wednesday, and then a few hours later we're actually on our way to Florida with the president on Air Force One and his pretty cool plane.
We are finally putting America first.
He is the Energizer president, going from rally to rally with just days left before the midterm elections. The mainstream media have been saying for months that a big blue Democrat wave is coming to wash over Trump and his party. But aboard Air Force One in his private office, the president told CBN's Jenna Browder and me that he's not buying it.
We're just a few days away from the midterms. How are you feeling, and what do you think about this so-called blue wave?
Well, I think the blue wave is dead, frankly, and I think we're doing very well. It looks like we're going to win the Senate, which is very important.
Mr. President, what about Nancy Pelosi's comments? She's already kind of spiking the football with "we will win, we will win." What do you make of some of that?
Well, I haven't seen her comments. I know that, look, she's been losing for a long time, so, you know, she would like to win. She hasn't been doing too well. We'll see what happens. I think we're going to do very well in the House also.
Our trip aboard Air Force One was a virtual whirlwind. At our stop in Florida, we went backstage for a glimpse of the calm before the Trump campaign storm.
The President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
And as usual, the president was in rare form.
Who voted? Who voted? Oh, wow. Everybody voted already?
Here on the ground in Florida, the energy for President Trump and his Republican candidates is palpable. And so is that deranged swamp anger.
Yeah, and I would also say that he is dishing out the red meat, as we know. He does it all the time at these rallies. So the question is civility, or, as his critics say, lack thereof. It's something we discussed with him on Air Force One. We've heard so much about hostility and incivility, and the media has been on you, as this just in, the media has been on you. What kind of role do you believe that you play? Do you feel like you have any responsibility in this whatsoever?
Well, I think the media is extremely unfair. It has been from the time I announced. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm Republican, I'm conservative, many other reasons, and probably me too.
He specifically believes that they breed dissension by unfairly covering events like his trip to the scene of the synagogue shooting.
We had a great day. It was so respectful of the office of president. And if you got home and if you read the New York Times or the Washington Post, or if you saw any of the networks, you would say it was violence, it was riots. I mean, it was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And everybody that was on that trip agreed with us. It was so wrong what they did. It was so phony.
There are people kind of following up on that who like to call you anti-Semitic, who like to call you a racist, Mr. President. What would you say to these people?
Well, you know, the word racist is used about every Republican that's winning. Anytime a Republican is leading, they take out the R word, the racist word. And I'm not anti-immigrant at all. I'm all for people coming into the country legally and people based on merit. But when you see a caravan that's pouring up to our country with thousands of people, maybe 10,000 people now, look, we're not going to let them come into our country. We have 10, and we might even go up to 15,000 soldiers on our border. We are building a wall in its own way. We're putting up walls of barbed wire. And when you look at what we're doing, they're just not coming into our country. They might as well go back now. But take a look at the violence that they've created down there, the level of I mean, these are not angels, as you would say. These are not angels.
You say you're not going to let him into the country. What is this about tent cities? And that could be a tricky situation.
Well, we're going to build housing. Obviously, it has to be built very fast. And we're going to give them better housing than many of them have. We're going to hold them. We are not going to release them. We're going to hold them until their deportation hearing goes, and their asylum hearings.
No catch and release, right?
No, we're not going to do catch and release. Catch and release is no good. Obama proved that.
As issues like immigration get touchy at times for some, evangelicals continue to stick with this president. The question for Trump is, will they do so even though he's not on the ballot next Tuesday?
Well, they're going to show up for me because nobody's done more for Christians or evangelicals or, frankly, religion than I have. You see all the things that we've passed, including the Johnson Amendment and so many things that we've nullified. Nobody's done more than we have. Mexico City, take a look at that. Things that, frankly, until Ronald Reagan, I mean, nobody did anything. So I know they're very happy with me. We've seen they're very happy. The question is whether or not they're going to go out and vote when I'm not running. I have no doubt they're going to be there in 20. I hope they're going to be there now, because it'll be a lot easier if they are, a lot better.
There are a lot of folks praying for you out there. We hear this all the time. You and Mike Pence hear this all the time. How has that moved you? Because a lot of people think, you know, the empathy factor with you as president is on the low end, if you will.
I don't think they do think that. I think they think
the critics think that. The critics.
Well, maybe the critics say it because they're doing anything to get us all out of office. No, I think we've had tremendous support in the form of prayer. And I get it all the time. I'm praying for you, Mr. President. I'm praying for you. I hear it so much. It's nice. And it's great to see it and great to hear it. But all the time, people are coming up to me and they're saying, Mr. President, I'm praying for you. It's very nice.
While President Trump appreciates the prayers, he will be looking for votes to carry him and his party over the finish line next week.
David, the president declared in that piece that the blue wave is dead. Where's he getting that from? What's that based on?
Where's he getting that intel?
Yeah.
Well, some polls are moving in the direction of the Senate races for sure. And let's remember about a blue wave here. Very, very important. Everybody talks about, well, if they win the House, Democrats, if they win the House, it's a blue wave. No, it's not. A blue wave needs to be, first of all, 40, technically, needs to be 40 seats or more in the House. That's a blue wave. Also, if the Senate remains in Republican control, you can't call it a blue wave. So I think on some of the technicalities, if you will, that's where he's going, Amber.
The definition of blue wave.
Something along those lines, yes.
David, a new PBS PBS NewsHour Marist poll shows that 40% of Americans blame President Trump for the lack of civility. You kind of addressed that. I'm very curious what you sensed with his response. Not just his answer, but how he responded.
Well, defiance, but it was a kind of a cool defiance, as in, please, like I'm really going to admit that I'm part of the problem? He's not going to do that.
Right.
I mean, and he'll never do that. And you know what? If he was sitting right next to us on the Faith Nation set, he'd say, yeah, you're right, I'm never going to admit that. And he's proud of it. And I'm not saying that's good at all. I'm not saying I'm not saying necessarily it's bad. I'm just simply saying that he wasn't going to.
It's not in his character.
It's not in his character to do it. He'll never do it. And if people think he's going to change or there's going to be this kumbaya Donald Trump in the next few years, not going to happen. Let's just all understand that that will not happen. So then the question is, how do you deal with this in the next 2 years? Because clearly his rhetoric has been over the top at times. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure that out. But at the same time, he's going to blame it on a few other entities in the room, which they also have responsibility, and he likes to muddy the waters, and that's what he's doing here.
Now, he has a busy schedule over the next few days, and my question is does that equal confidence or concession? Because we haven't seen the president out there like this, visiting states this much just before midterm elections?
That's a really good question. I'm going to go with confidence, and here's why. Because what we saw on Air Force One yesterday was confidence by him. And, you know, I've been around him a lot, and, you know, he's a New Yorker, I'm a New Yorker, and so I can kind of understand when he's kind of, you know, maybe not necessarily on the up and up with the way he is, but his demeanor was very confident. He believes that the immigration stuff is working. He's not going to say it like that, but the truth of the matter is, they feel like they're in a good place because they're riling up the base just like it was in 2016, to a degree.
I want to know a little bit more about your sense of his reaction to the whole ginning up the base with the immigration talk that he's been doing lately. This, of course, is something that he campaigned on vigorously in 2016. He's bringing it up in the final stretch of the midterm elections race as well. How authentic is that? Is that really part of what he believes will make America great again, or is it something that he just knows will deliver the votes?
It's both, and it's 100% both. In other words, he knows there's a political result and a positive one for him and his base. But you know what? He wouldn't be the first politician to gin up the base. So we need to understand that. But beyond that, he really believes it. He's been saying it for decades, and I did ask him that. And as we see those rally shots, you know, we showed a lot of folks in that crowd because there's a lot of palpable anger in that crowd. I know the media talks about how they can be concerned and scared, and I understand that. But at the same time, there is some anger, and the immigration issue definitely plays into that. So, yeah, but in answer to the gin up the base, I literally said the words gin up the base. Are you just doing this to gin up the base? Well, I knew he wasn't going to say yes, but he didn't say no. He just said, look, if that's the case, well, I've been doing this for years. Right. So he is the greatest showman, and he would call that a compliment, I think.
David Brody, thank you so much for your insight.
It is a pleasure. Good to see you, Amber.
I'm glad you could take the time after, you know, making it on Air Force One today.
That's right. I'm going to sleep now. I'll be sleeping right here. Good night, folks.
David. Well, President Trump has been speaking out on immigration and citizenship since before taking office. In a speech today at the White House, he continued to do just that.
Catch and release. It's a disgrace that we have to put up with it. These policies lead to the release of illegal aliens into our communities after they've been apprehended. But we're not releasing anymore. Big change as of a couple of days ago. We're going to no longer release. We're going to catch. We're not going to release. They're going to stay with us until the deportation hearing or the asylum hearing takes place. So we're not releasing them into the community. We have millions of people that over the years have been released into the community. They never show up for the trials. They never come back. They're never seen again.
The Michigan Senate race is getting closer, although the incumbent Democrat candidate still holds a lead less than a week from the midterms. Her Republican challenger isn't backing down. Caitlin Burke traveled to Michigan to bring us the story.
The Senate race in Michigan has gotten closer, with underdog Republican candidate John James making a late October surge in the polls. Now he's giving incumbent Senator Debbie Stabenow the political fight of her life.
This whole race started on my knees. This whole thing started with praying for wisdom and asking the Lord to not necessarily make my path easy, but to make it clear, and has absolutely done that. So I have the faith and believe that I may be in this position for a time such as this, and it's not because I'm anything special, but because God is preparing to do a great work in the state of Michigan.
Michigan is a key battleground. President Trump barely won the state in 2016.
It was the closest margin of victory of any state in the country. So although he did win, his victory shows a very closely divided state.
Now, as Republicans fight to maintain control of the House and Senate, political analyst and reporter Robert Yoon sees Michigan as a state to watch because voters here tend to cross party lines for candidates who appeal to them.
They've shown that in elections in the past where they'd elect Republican governors and a Democratic senator, or in the case of 2016, vote for a Republican for president.
Democrat incumbent Stabenow has represented Michigan in the Senate for 18 years, serving as a commissioner, state representative, and U.S. representative along the way. We reached out to the Stabenow campaign with interview requests and received no response. Throughout her campaign, Stabenow has focused on standing up for families, farmers, and job creation. She also points to her ability to work across the aisle, even in a divisive political climate.
I've worked with Democrats and Republicans my whole life to get things done.
John James, meanwhile, has no previous political experience. He's a veteran and a successful Detroit businessman.
You have so many people in Washington who are, as far as business is concerned, they're legislating and regulating industries, and they've never run a business before. I would say that what are their qualifications to impose on the people? I believe that there's no replacement or substitute for experience.
He says his time on the front lines taught him about strong national security. Business experience formed his stance on economic opportunity. And by bringing together soldiers from different backgrounds under his command, he knows a thing or two about unity.
During the primaries, President Trump endorsed James when he was trailing, helping him secure the Republican nomination. Now, with only days left until the election, the White House continues to support the political novice from Michigan.
I'm here for one reason, and one reason only. Michigan and America need John James in the United States Senate.
Democrats are beginning to take the Michigan challenge seriously, leading former President Barack Obama to campaign here.
I'm hopeful that despite all the noise, despite all the lies, we're going to cut through all that. We're going to remember who we are, who we're called to be. I'm hopeful because out of this political darkness, I'm seeing a great awakening all across the country.
Yoon says that while Stabenow initially ignored her Republican rival, she's now running ads about her work with veterans and the military, and warning about the close tie between James and President Trump. Not much time remains to see what will make the difference for these candidates on Tuesday.
Caitlin Burke was on the ground there in Michigan, and she joins us now. Caitlin, what is the sense that you're getting? Can John James pull off this upset?
Okay, so you've got to keep this in mind. The polls are going back and forth a little bit. Last week, he had closed the gap to 6 points. This week, some polls are showing it's at about 9 points of a difference. But in September, he was 23 points behind Debbie Stabenow, who's the incumbent. And she has been in office as the senator for Michigan for 18 years. So the fact that he made such a huge jump shows that anything is really possible.
You know, my question is, why is that? What are some of the big issues going on there in Michigan that are kind of swaying the vote?
Yeah, so one factor besides the issue is that he got a big endorsement from President Trump, and that really helped him close the deal in the primaries. And the White House has really been behind him from the beginning, even though he is a political novice, he's totally unknown, and that's what's going against him is just getting name recognition out there. But the White House has just loved him from the start. And honestly, the Trump factor is a huge issue in this election in Michigan. People either love Trump or they hate him. And that's really interesting because Michigan voters don't normally make their decisions based on the party. They really go by the appeal of the candidate.
James is young. He's 37 years old. He's an African American and he's a conservative. There's been a lot of talk about this idea of trying to bring young African Americans to the conservative movement, but he had some pretty raw comments about that. What did he tell you about black conservatives?
Yeah, so he acknowledged most African American voters in Michigan are not Republican. And he says that it's really about repairing the relationship there. He said his parents are two Democrats and he was raised by them. And his conservative values are the same values that they raised him on, and he wants to bring the Republican Party back to that. One of the things he said to me that I love, I'm just going to read the quote. He said, "The neo-progressive movement has absolutely abandoned African Americans. The traditional Democratic establishment has neglected African Americans, and Republicans in many respects haven't even tried. The Republican Party traditionally is the party of emancipation. It's the party of suffrage. It's the party of the civil rights movement. But we've forgotten our roots and we need to get back there." And I just thought that that was such a good perspective. That's what he is trying to get out there to African American voters. And, you know, kind of just talk about the things that matter to them.
Fascinating. We'll see if that approach works there in Michigan. Of course, we'll be following this race. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for your reporting. We'll check back in, I am sure, over the next week.
Thanks, Amber.
When we come back, a look at the battle over who will win Georgia's next governor. The Georgia governor's race is bringing big names to campaign in the Peach State. Today, Oprah Winfrey stumped for Democrat Stacey Abrams, while Vice President Mike Pence rallied support for Republican Brian Kemp.
The truth is, in case you haven't noticed, that the policies President Trump's been advancing and the policies that Brian Kemp will advance and keep going here in Georgia, confidence is back. Jobs are coming back. In a word, America is back, and we're just getting started.
We are not powerless. Every single one of us has the same power at the polls. And every single one of us has something that, if done in numbers too big to tamper with, cannot be suppressed and cannot be denied.
Both sides bringing out the big guns. The latest Opinion Savvy poll has Abrams ahead by just 1%.
Former Democratic delegate for the state of Georgia and AND campaign president Justin Giboney joins us now to talk about the race. How you doing today, Justin?
I'm doing all right, Amber. How about yourself?
I'm good. I want to dive into this race because you've been there. You know that Georgia's a big state. Right now, they're in almost a statistical tie, according to Real Clear Politics. What is the sense you're getting from Georgia voters?
Well, the sense I'm getting, Amber, is really what I'm getting from both campaigns, that people are very divided and polarized. As you know, this has been a very polarizing campaign. You have two candidates who pretty much disagree on just about everything, from immigration to religious freedom and the expansion of Medicare and things of that nature. And so the people are divided. People are really up in arms. They seem very motivated. If you look at the numbers from early voting, they are very high. So people are serious about this election and are really rearing to go. It's not always pretty. I think the rhetoric has probably gotten out of hand in some cases, but people are fired up.
Wow. This is always fascinating to me, and that's the faith of both candidates. That's something that you guys do and talk about a lot at the AND campaign. What is the faith story of both of these candidates, and how is that affecting voters?
Well, I know that, for instance, Stacey Abrams comes from a Christian family. I believe she was raised in a Methodist church, and so that is part of her story. She recently came out with an article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about her faith. I believe Kemp is Christian. I don't know as much about his faith, but it's something that neither of them have run away from. Now, I may disagree about how they apply some of the doctrine of the faith, probably on both sides, but they are both Christians. I think they've both made attempts to connect with Christians based on their faith, and they say that it has a major part in the how they will govern.
Last question. Both candidates are pulling out the heavy hitters. Mike Pence there for Kemp, and then Stacey Abrams with Oprah Winfrey and Will Ferrell knocking on doors. Does that kind of thing really resonate with voters? You've been there, like I said before. Does bringing in the heavy hitters sway voters one way or another?
It can. In this particular case, I think most minds are made up. I mean, this is really late in the game. Most people have made up their minds. So when you bring in someone like this, my experience in campaigns that I've handled, you're bringing them in to fire people up and get them out to vote. So if somebody wants to come see, for instance, President Obama was here earlier in the week, that gets people thinking about the election, and that they go listen to him fired up to vote in a situation where they might not have voted. People who are regular voters or super voters are going to vote anyway, but it's some of those people who are less likely to vote that you bring in some of those big names, and it might motivate them to get out there when they wouldn't before. This is a race that is dependent on who's going to get their voters out. As you've seen, the polls are all within the error, and so it's about who's going to get their voters out, and that's why you bring these heavy hitters to motivate people to get out when they might not have gotten out before.
All right, last question. I know I said last question, but one more. Tuesday, we don't like to make predictions, but Tuesday is just around the corner. Where do you see this going?
It is hard to tell. I mean, like I said before, you have very tight polls, and it's all about who comes out. If we look at early voting is even close. So, I don't know that I have prediction. I try to stay away from it a little bit because I don't want it to seem like the AND campaign, my organization, is actually endorsing someone. But this can go either way, and I might even say that this might even go to a runoff. It's so close that you have a libertarian in the race, and so it may go to a runoff. So if I have to say one way or the other, I say it may go to the runoff, and we may be back at this until December.
Wow. Well, that means that we will have to call you back, and you'll have to come back and talk about it again. Is that a deal?
That's a deal.
All right. Justin Giboney with the AND campaign. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Amber.
Watch live election coverage on the CBN News Channel, Tuesday, November 6th from 8 p.m. to midnight.
Well, Amber, have you heard? The theme for next year's National Day of Prayer has been announced.
It will be Love One Another, one of my favorite verses. 300 Christian leaders gathered in Northwest Arkansas to plan this week to map out plans for the event. Dr. Roddy Floyd announced that it will call Americans to love one another. I think that's a pretty timely message. The theme comes from John chapter 13, verse 34, when Jesus says, "Love one another just as I have loved you." The Day of Prayer will be held Thursday, May 2nd, 2019.
And as you just said, just a timely word.
Absolutely poignant.
Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
We'll see you tomorrow.